Welcome to Ace of Pentacles, your career strategy and workplace wellness podcast. I'm your host, Sara, and I'm so happy you're here. Join me every week as we investigate how people design and discover their way through their careers. Together, we'll explore the science of well-being at work and discover tools and strategies to help us do well and be well. Hey, welcome back to Ace of Pentacles. Daniela Ruiz, or as some know her, Nani, is a creative coach, facilitator, and education and inclusion advocate. In this episode, Nani and I talk about how a specific challenge at work inspired her to take some stand-up comedy classes. This led Nani to finding a unique talent that she now brings to her coaching and facilitation practice. We talk about the importance of humor at work, especially in today's remote and hybrid work environment, and we share stories of being immigrant women in the U.S. navigating DEI and allyship in corporate America. Nani and I also discuss the challenges and gifts that come with being a multipotentialite. I love Nani's story of the challenge that she faces at work because I think many people, if they were in that situation, would have felt restricted or held back or started doubting themselves. And I think she did, but I think she also used that experience to propel her to her next step. She ended up actually using that experience to build a brand and a service that is very unique and very authentic, and I think it'll speak to a lot of people. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Daniela Ruiz.
Hi, Daniela. Nani Ruiz. How are you?
Hi, Sara. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm already so much happier than I was 2 minutes ago just by seeing you.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm honored that you would come on my podcast and share your story and your experiences. When I met you not too long ago, I was just so inspired by hearing your story, your career story, and I think the work you're doing is really cool. So I'd love to share that with our audience today.
Thank you so much. I'm also honored to be here. And if any of my story can be any inspiration to anybody out there listening, then, I'm happy to do that.
Wonderful. Okay, so Nani, let's start with who are you? Who is Daniela Ruiz? Tell us your career story and what brings you to where you are today.
Who are you? We're starting chill here, right?
Yeah.
With the questions. Well, Sara, to be honest, that has always been a very hard question for me to answer because my career path has been very diverse, very non-linear. And I think that we're so used to defining ourselves by the work that we do. So you are a lawyer, or you are a designer, or you are an architect. And when you don't have that, or dare I say, you have many of those on your plate, how do you define yourself? It's really a challenge. It has been a challenge for me. Continues to be. I continue to redefine myself. I feel like I've changed careers so many times. At the moment, I am an ICF certified coach. I'm a workshop designer and facilitator, and I do most of my work in career coaching mostly for tech boot camps. So I've been in the tech industry for the last 8 years or so. And I also design and facilitate leadership development workshops and change management workshops. So that's what I've been doing. That's what defines me lately. Also, I am a stand-up comedian and a mom and many other things. So that's where my double name comes from, actually. In my artistic career, I'm known as Nani. And then in my professional world, I'm mostly known as Daniela. And lately, what's been happening that has been really wonderful is that the two started to integrate a little bit more and merge. And so part of that performance artist started to come into my work, the work that I do too. And I've been doing some keynote speaking engagements and talking about the importance of humor at work and bringing levity. And I've even done actual stand-up routines for companies, taking into their consideration, their mission, their values, whatever. And so that's where I actually have, two separate profiles. I'm Daniela Ruiz on LinkedIn, and then I was Nani Lucente on Instagram. And it has started to create some problems for me. Even when we met at the castle, might I say, people knew me there by Nani. But then when people had to leave you messages on the last day, the organizers put Daniela on my sticky, and I didn't get many messages. And I'm pretty sure it's because people didn't recognize me as Daniela. So this dual personality thing is causing some pain. That's why now it's like I put both on LinkedIn, Daniela, Nani Ruiz, and I'm navigating that integration.
Wow, what a cool story. And I have to say, your story, it's unique, but I think the thing that you're trying to navigate isn't that isolated of an issue, I guess. I do a lot of energy work. So I do like energy healing work. I do hypnotherapy, but I have this big long career in HR, and my corporate clients that I consult with, I don't have two different names, but I do have slightly different personas. And it's been interesting because through this podcast, I've been able to kind of like weave those two together. And so I, on LinkedIn, you'll see me posting about like feedback and like, leadership and careers. And then on Instagram, mostly, you see me posting a lot about like my energy work and healing. And, so I think that's a shared experience by people who do get to do a lot of stuff with their lives, and especially people who are in the creative space, because you're exploring how to bring these two talents of yours or these two lives of yours together. I would love to hear from your perspective for the people who are going through this, who are navigating a journey similar to yours. What advice do you have for them? How do we even define ourselves as people who do lots of different things?
Yeah. Well, there's a term actually that has been coined a few years ago that is multipotentialites.
Multipotentialites.
Yep.
Okay.
So
Tell us
more. We are people who actually have many different potentials, and we're embracing all of them at once, because that's what makes us who we are. And normally, if we only explore one of our talents or one of our many interests, we feel pretty miserable, or we feel like we have to be jumping from one thing to the next because it doesn't really fulfill us. Because it's in our nature to be interested in many things and be talented in many things too. So there is this term, multipotentialized. Thankfully, it's important to name things. So I was very pleased when I found, okay, I'm not alone in this. There are many of us, but many of us grew up with the message of like, you have to find your passion and go for it, and this is who you are and what you'll do for the rest of your life. And I continue to joke about this. Last night at dinner, with my parents, we're on vacation together now. And we were talking about what the kids want to be when they grow up. And I said, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
But I'm 44, so. And it's a joke. It's not a joke. It's like I'm always becoming the next thing. And I think once you can embrace it, there's some beauty in that, because you don't need to define yourself by what you're not. So what advice do I have? It's kind of tricky. And it's tricky to apply it to yourself, if I'm being honest, because as a career coach, I can see when another person has many talents, and, I encourage them to embrace them all. And how can you bring them together? And what part of this interest of yours could you merge with this other interest that you have, or with this work that you're doing? And I think that's probably where the zone of genius comes in, right? Where you can really bring in different aspects from each one of your facets it's like a prism, like you create a multifaceted version. And it's such a gift, because normally you can look at a situation from so many different angles. You have so much information that you bring from different domains that your outlook and your what you have to contribute is always pretty unique from all of those domains that you have explored.
Yeah.
Very valuable too.
Absolutely. You mentioned, it's hard to to exist in this world and define who you are when the whole world, it seems, the whole world is very much like, what's your path? What's your story? What's your career? What is your job? What do you do? And so often we lead into conversations with like, well, here's what I do. When people ask you, like we started with like, who are you? Tell us your story. And it's like, people are expecting like a job title and like, where you were born, maybe a little bit about like your background, but then it's like, what do you spend your time doing? And I think it can become really hard to brand yourself, in this world, because we do need to exist in like the corporate world, for example, where people need to know, like we have on LinkedIn, we have like these taglines, right?
Of what do I hire you for? Okay,
right,
that's
exactly.
Great.
Exactly. Like what can you do for me, right? Yeah. And what can you do for my company? And it's really hard to capture that when you are able to do so many different things in so many different ways. So how do you brand yourself? I know it's been a journey for you. You're evolving through that journey, but tell us a little bit about your learnings on that journey.
In my case, I have found in facilitation, for example, a playground where I feel like I can be myself, where I can bring in most of my performance artist skills and then mix them with my corporate world's knowledge and actually deliver impact. But that was something I found through working in different capacities, right? It's not something that I went after or that I knew beforehand. So I think most of the work for people like us lies in that exploration of allowing yourself to explore different things and see where you feel most comfortable and where you can add value, and also take some feedback, like hear what people are telling you, because sometimes we don't see. I found this to be true. Some skills that are very natural for us, we don't see them as valuable because we've always had them, or it seems like, oh, we've always been this way, so this shouldn't have any value. And then people reflect back to you and they tell you, no, this is so wonderful. And it's like, oh, okay. I didn't know. Like public speaking, I love public speaking. I've always loved public speaking since I was a child. So I never took it as a skill. It wasn't a learned skill for me. But now I know people pay money to learn how to speak in public. So it's important to take that feedback from other people around you who can see you in different ways, and who can tell you and help you position yourself in a certain market, right? How do they think they could use you in their company? How do they think you could add value here or there? And then see if that actually resonates with you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like, I love the way you said that, what we do that's so uniquely us, that's our gift and our talent. We're so used to doing that we think everyone should be able to do this. Like it's so, because it's very human, right? We think of our talents as like very human. And so it's like, well, everyone should be able to do it. It's nothing special. I think it's really important to ask your friends, your family, your coworkers, which sounds weird, but I tell my clients this a lot. I'm like, have you just like asked people that you've worked with something like, what do I do really well? And they're like, that's a weird question. And I'm like, no, I'm like, be comfortable asking, explore, right? Ask other people, what do you see in me that I'm not able to see in myself?
Yep. Yeah, that feedback is normally really valuable. I have from my last full-time job, we had the recognition was part of the culture, which is beautiful and I think should be part of every culture. So we had an opportunity to tell our colleagues, our coworkers, to highlight something from them if we wanted to. It was just optional. But every so often on Friday, you would get in your email inbox some cards from colleagues showing some appreciation for something you had said, you had done, or you had made them feel, who knows. And I collected all of those cards and I made like a mural for myself, like a recognition wall. So whenever I'm doubting myself or don't know, what I'm good at or what I'm valuable for, I go back to that wall and that really helps me. I think it's actually a good practice to keep some sort of log of those comments because we often forget, right? Yeah. We are so good at remembering the one time somebody told us something bad.
Yes.
all the positive feedback that we get goes right out the wall.
Yes, 100%. We definitely remember the criticisms and the constructive feedback a lot more.
Yep.
And we're also, I think, so many of us are so self-critical that it's nice to have those reminders. I also have a practice like that where if I get good feedback, I'll if it's written or whatever, I'll hold on to it. And it's nice to look back at.
100%. Yep.
All right, Nani. I was really excited to talk to you today, partly because of this conversation that we're having so far, but also because when we first met at the castle, you mentioned a story of an experience that you had at work that landed you in a challenging situation. And I was really inspired by how you were able to kind of turn that around and find a different perspective on that. And I think this goes back to your ability to bring that levity and that humor. And, you mentioned you do, stand-up comedy, and you kind of bring that aspect of who you are into your work, which I think is really, really needed right now. I think it's a really valuable skill to have, and it's a very valuable perspective to bring to the workplace. So, would you mind telling us the story of what happened and how it kind of shaped your career trajectory?
Sure. So what happened was at the time, I was in charge of running training webinars online. This was during the pandemic. So, everything was over Zoom. And I was an enablement specialist for a brand, and I had to teach people how to use it. And so we would do these open webinars. Anybody could join. And I was teaching how to use the tool. And during this webinar, I was doing it with a coworker who shared a very similar sense of humor with me. I have to add here, he was also I'm from Argentina. I didn't mention that. He was also from Argentina. So we had a very similar outlook, if you will, of humor, because humor is very cultural. And so during this webinar, I made a comment. I made a joke, actually. It doesn't even qualify as a joke. But I made a funny comment that, to me, it was a self-referencing or self-deprecating joke, because in Argentina, we often laugh at ourselves for being a third world country. And so what that means is that we still get the things, but they're like a crappy version of the things, right? And so in this particular situation, my teammate was creating a Mickey Mouse on screen, and it was a very crappy Mickey Mouse. And so I said, "Oh, that's a third world version of a Mickey Mouse." And I was referring to if you go to the beach here in Argentina, there's a train that is full of characters, like people wearing costumes of characters that go with the kids on the train. But they are that quality, right? They're so sad. And so to me, that was the reference for my joke. And as soon as I said it, I was like, maybe people don't get that reference. And that could be construed as not appropriate for a work environment. And sure enough, nobody said anything. And then I felt that if I said something else, it was only going to make it worse, right? So I just let it sit there and continued with the training. And a few weeks later, my boss comes to me and says that there was someone in a call. She didn't say that call. Then I put two and two together. But and a client was very upset, and they had contacted the head of HR directly because I violated their code of conduct, and they said that was completely inappropriate, and that I would make such a remark, and that it was racist because also the drawing was black. So she already, on top of everything, she already made that up to be a racist comment. Anyways, which was a shock to me at the moment, because I was the co-lead of the DEI initiatives at that company. Like, I tried to find myself on the opposite side of racism every day of my life, and I'm an advocate and I am even considered a person of color myself and a woman and a Latina. I'm part of so many minorities already as it is. But I can definitely understand how that was misinterpreted and that because it wasn't contextualized appropriately. So for 3 days, I didn't know if I was going to be able to keep my job because there had to be a conversation between the head of HR and that particular client. And 3 days later, when they told me, okay, you're going to be able to keep your job, the client didn't request for you to be fired. I was like, huh. And mind you, this was a job that I loved and I was really good at it too. So it just felt like a human mistake, right? Like it happens to the best of us. And so that same day that they told me, okay, you're keeping your job, I remember it was a Friday afternoon. And that evening I enrolled into my first stand-up comedy course because I decided, okay, there's definitely an outlet here that there's something about humor that comes very naturally to me, but I need to learn how to channel it in the right environments, right? And so the next day I started my first class in stand-up comedy. And over the following 3 years, I became an active stand-up comedian in Buenos Aires.
Wow. What a story.
I want to say too, because I think this is interesting about the story. And I'm not trying to not take the responsibility for what I said. But the person who got upset was not a person from a third world country that felt attacked by my comment, which I think is interesting. It's an interesting thing that's happening in the world.
Yeah.
This was someone from a first world country that was getting upset on behalf of, right? And kind of canceling me for saying something that she considered to be out of place without understanding also the full context in which I was saying that. So again, taking full responsibility for maybe my comment not being appropriate. I also think that there's something to be said for that, right? There were people from other third world countries and nobody took offense in my comment.
Yeah. It almost feels like it could have been a situation in which, because the context was missing for this person, they found it offensive. And this happens, I think this happens a lot. I agree with you. I think we have been in a moment since 2020 where allyship is really important. And this person may have felt like this was the way to demonstrate their allyship and be an ally. And I always kind of wonder about that. So because you were so brave and shared your story, can I share a story of my own?
Of course, I would love that.
Okay, so my name is Sara. My name is pronounced Sara. The Pakistani version of it is pronounced Sara. And here in the United States, we immigrated here when I was 2. And my name was Sara when I came here. Everyone called me Sara. And it wasn't a big deal. People still call me Sara, and I don't care, right? It's not like I'm bothered by it. I have no feelings about it. And in around 2020, 2021, I was having these work meetings and, people would join Zoom and we're already all remote. No one really knows each other. And I had this one meeting where we had like 30 or 40 people from the company, like all these people, and everybody was joining. And my name, the name of the organizer, a lot of people didn't even know me. We hadn't had one-on-one interaction. And a lot of these people just saw that Sara Mirza, S-A-R-A, right? Sara Mirza set up this meeting. So everyone's joining, and one of my teammates sends me a note, and they're all saying, Sara, thank you for setting up this meeting. Hi, Sara, how are you? Like greeting me. And one of my teammates sends me a chat in Zoom and goes, if you don't tell them how to say your name right, I will. And I was like, I was kind of stressed out because it was a big meeting, and I was like, okay, well, I was like, it's okay. I texted her and I was like, don't worry about it. And she kept kind of texting and she goes, you shouldn't be okay with this. And I was like, I'm over here stressing out about this meeting because it's a huge meeting, right? And I'm like, this is not, I don't care. Like, this is the least one of my problems right now is like how people are saying my name. And she was very sweet and I adored her, but she very much wanted to show up for me, like defend me and tell people to say my name correctly. And I told her, okay, can we just talk about this later? And what's interesting about my name to me is that the history of my name is, first of all, I wasn't even born with the name Sara. My mom actually wanted to name me something different, which I didn't get named that name. And so when my mom moved here, now just thinking about the experience, right, the immigrant experience, when my mom moved to this country, I think for her, it was a little bit exciting. She was a woman in Peshawar, in Pakistan. Like, people didn't just get up and like leave back then in like 1988 or whatever. And she did this. She made this really brave move. And she did it for her family. She did it for her kids. And she was a single parent. And my mom's like, I love and admire my mom so much. And I love her strength. And I love her story. So when my mom came here, her name's Naseem. And she went by Nancy. She didn't formally change her name, but Naseem was a hard name to pronounce for people. So she was like, cool, I'll make it easy for you. My name was Sara, but I went by Sarah, right? And I went to school and everybody called me Sarah, and it was never anything we talked about at home. At home, they always called me Sonia. That was the name my mom wanted to give me. So at home, everyone, my cousin, everyone at home, everyone in my family calls me Sonia. No one even calls me Sara at home. So it just never mattered. And so around this time in 2020, I talked to my mom about this and I was like, my mom, it's funny because she would call me Sarah in front of my friends. So growing up, my mom would even call me Sarah in front of my friends. And it's just been like, this is just how it's been. And it has nothing to do with us being ashamed of anything. It's almost actually the opposite, where my mom tried to assimilate. And that was the goal. She came to America. We learned English. We learned, how to be American. And so that was the purpose. That was the point. It doesn't mean we lost our culture, right? It doesn't mean anything like that. And so my mom, she's very Pakistani. She's really funny. And I asked her about this whole name thing. I was like, well, you call me Sarah sometimes in front of like my American friends and stuff. And my mom looks at me and she goes, is your identity that weak? That like you think someone pronouncing your name a certain way means you're not Pakistani anymore? It really made me like reflect on, the pronunciation of my name and what it means. And like, I don't care when people call me Sarah. And it's because of this. It's because I'm always going to be Pakistani. I'm always going to be Muslim. I'm always going to be my mom's daughter, right? These are parts of my identity that don't change just because someone didn't pronounce my name right.
Yeah.
So I think these experiences are so interesting from the perspective when you look at it from the lens of someone who is that identity, who is the immigrant in the room, or the, kind of like you made this comment or told the story with the reference of being, from a third world country. And then someone else who doesn't really have that experience comes in, and it's almost going against the whole purpose of DEI and inclusion, where you're projecting almost like your anger and your experience onto this person. Like, I should be offended because this person made this comment, or I'm offended on behalf of someone else. And I think it's really unfortunate. I think it happens a lot, and I think it's unfortunate.
It does. It happens a lot, and I think it also, even though it's meant in a good way, like you said, the intent is good, it actually like hinders the actual conversation that needs to be happening, because you're making so many assumptions when you tell someone else what they should be offended by, instead of just actually listening and seeing what they might be offended by. And maybe that was not the comment. Maybe it is, I don't know, the fact that the training is only in English and they cannot access if they don't speak that language. I don't know. It could be so many other things.
Yeah.
But it's a very touchy topic, really. I have a similar situation in that I immigrated to the US too as an adult, and I had my kids there. So both of my kids are bicultural. And they have this, duality for good and for bad. They can see the different aspects of each one of the cultures, and both of them are part of themselves. And thankfully, they'll get to, I guess, pick and choose what they identify with. and have kind of a broader spectrum of what they see as possibilities and what they understand from the world. I think just by speaking two languages, that's kind of a given. Your brain has to contort so much to understand. It's language is not just what we say, right? It's culture. There's so much behind it. And you know, as a coach, that we create worlds through our words. And so when you speak in two or more languages, there are just more worlds that you can explore and be a part of.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. When you speak two or more languages, there's just more worlds that you get to create.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Nani, the other thing I really like about the story that you shared is that you were able to take an experience that was uncomfortable. You know, it was difficult. It was a challenge.
Yes.
And you were able to almost flip it and be like, okay, there's something there. I have humor. I have this talent. I enjoy it. How do I channel it in the right way? And then I assume that's when you started doing some of the bringing in more levity and more humor into the workplace and actually making it part of your brand.
Absolutely. It took a while. So first I went completely okay, I'll take this elsewhere because I was a little, scared from the situation. And so, as I said, I kind of turned to stand-up comedy and I wrote a routine and I started performing. And once that was kind of second nature for me and that became also part of my identity, I felt more empowered to then turn back to the workplace and say, okay, I can manage this. I know how to do this. And also I can see there's a power here. There's a valuable skill that I can share with others. And I have been exploring that lately. And I can see how it really, there are so many benefits to using humor in organizations. And using humor helps us to approach difficult topics or difficult conversations with a sense of levity, like we said, or sometimes when the conversation is really intense, and I've been in circles where it was really intense, and then someone in the middle of that, they crack a joke and everybody goes and there's that release that you get when you laugh. But it doesn't mean you're not taking the conversation seriously whatsoever, but you just needed that release of that tension to then continue digging deeper into whatever the topic might be. And when your mind is in that relaxed state, that's when creativity happens, right? That's when innovation can happen. So there are so many benefits of using humor at work. But then again, there are those things where, okay, what are the limitations? When is it appropriate? And that's an entire conversation. I mean, the political climate right now in the U.S. is very difficult for lots of people. And so it goes beyond whether or not we use humor at work and what jokes can we make and what jokes we cannot, right?
Yeah. I think it's especially difficult right now because of remote work, distributed work. People aren't face to face. And I think so much can happen when you are face to face and you understand the person's way of speaking, their way of connecting with other people. People tell me I'm very professional, but I have a very playful side. And so I feel like I have the type of humor that sometimes, often lands well. But I don't think I'd be able to do that if I was always remote and always communicating over chat, over Slack, over text, whatever. I don't think people would understand the humor via chat. And I think a lot of it can be misinterpreted.
100%, because also you don't know when the other person is going to read that message and what they might be going through in the moment when they read that. And for example, in my communication style, when I write, I tend to be pretty direct, It's I tend to skip the pleasantries and all those things. And for other cultures, that's so important, right? And so saying good morning, how are you doing, and how was your weekend? And actually, I don't care. So for me, it's I need this whatever by end of day, please.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not rude. It's just communicating what I need, what I expect from you. But for other people, that's harder. But to me, like when you're like, good morning, how's it going? How's your weekend? I want to just skip intro, like, what do you need?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, in a remote environment, it's harder. We don't know each other's contexts. We very often are not familiar with each other's cultures or where we come from. If this is something common in my culture to not be so like small talky, this is common here. But then if I'm working with people from the US, I know there's a different code of conduct there, if you will. So there's something to be learned about the culture of the place where you work. And I think we could use a lot more empathy too between coworkers and trying to assume best intent from people and us, if anything, right? Instead of point fingers or I think we could have really interesting and enriching conversations if we just took the time to do that.
Yeah. I agree with you. I don't know. I don't think we spend enough time talking about how to even ask someone, like, are you okay that this happened? Or how are you feeling about the way that I communicate? Like, we make so many assumptions when it comes to communication. Again, it goes back to like this thing that's very human, right? We talk, everybody talks to each other, everyone communicates. And I think we make a lot of assumptions about the way that people engage based on how we engage. And I think we're not comfortable enough having those. These are difficult conversations. They're uncomfortable conversations a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I just don't think we get the proper training, the proper, it's almost like training and then also permission, to be able to inquire in this way.
And one thing I would like to bring light to, I think, for the corporate world that we know, for the most part, it's very American-centric. So we tend to think that the best practice or the best way to do this is the way we do it in America. And I see this goes in so many levels. Like even as a career coach for American boot camps, I have to train people on how to interview well, right? And the way I teach them to do it is very biased towards the American market. And for some people who come from very different cultures, this is really uncomfortable, right? Speaking about themselves in a certain way, having to sell themselves, some things that we take for granted, like this is how you do it. For other people who come from other countries and other cultures, this is very, very hard. And I really don't think that necessarily, that the American way should be the only way that is right.
Yeah. Actually, Nani, this reminds me of, I've seen LinkedIn posts that you've done on accessibility issues in Latin American countries and the South. I'd love for you to share a little bit on your perspective on that. What's happening there? How might we be able to remedy the situation and get our audience to become aware of this?
Yeah. I just kind of heard myself say that, like, the American way is not the only way, and I sounded kind of angry maybe. I just want to make it very clear that I'm not. I'm just trying to use this wider perspective that I have to maybe bring awareness to something that is not obvious for other people. But I'm very thankful for, I've learned so much about work from my American colleagues and the American companies I have worked for, and I'm super grateful for that.
By the way, I didn't think you sounded angry. I thought that was very well said. I don't think you sounded angry. Yeah.
Good. Just in case.
It's very accurate.
In case there's someone from Canada who thinks.
Okay, so anyone listening from Canada.
And maybe gets mad on behalf of Americans. See, now I'm generalizing. That's not good. I'm just making a joke. All right. Let's move on.
I love this conversation. Yes. So if anyone feels like you need to be offended on behalf of Americans, please don't, because I'm an American.
I have a passport.
There we go. We're both American.
All right. So accessibility. I'm very passionate about this. Again, I wasn't really aware of my privileges until very recently because, for example, speaking English, for me, it's almost second nature now. I've been working English for so many years, and I lived in the US. So I can access any training I want that is out there in English. And so I never saw this as an accessibility issue. And then what actually happened was that I wanted to, even though I was facilitating as part of my daily work, I wasn't a trained facilitator, right? So I wanted to take an actual course in facilitation and get the credential and, that seal of trust on my LinkedIn profile. So I wanted to enroll in one of the most well-known facilitation training programs. And when I went to enroll, the price of the training was equal to 16 months of my rent back at home. So it was a big decision for me to make, right? I'm a single mother of 2. At the time, thankfully, I was working for a US company and I had a US salary. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I actually took that leap of faith because, one, they say that if you do it, then with the first customer that you get, you can pay off the training course, which hasn't happened yet, but it might. And second, and most importantly, because I wanted to belong to that international community of facilitators. I wanted my name to be there amongst the names of those other people that are accredited and renowned and whatever. So I took the leap and I paid for that course. Not before having this conversation with them where I told them, look, this, I understand you might not see this as a very large amount of money, but for people in other countries, in other parts of the world where our currencies are weaker, this is actually 16 months of my rent that I'm putting towards this education. Anyways, as I said, I decided to do it anyways. I actually gave them an idea on a model that they could use, and we can touch on that later because you said, how might we help?
Yeah.
So I have an idea or some ideas. But anyways, I did the course, and then I had access to another training within that community, thankfully, because I paid that much and I was in a position to do that. And I was in another training that was really interesting. And so the facilitator, a very well-known book author, did an icebreaker and asked, okay, where are you all joining from? So put a sticky on the map. And when we all put our stickies, like people didn't have room to put their stickies in Europe, and they almost were fighting over the spots in the US to put their stickies. And I was the only sticky in the entire global south. The entire southern part, like from the equator down, mine was the only one sticky. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, there's something here.
Yeah.
Something's happening. And this is exactly what's happening. Training courses are, first of all, they're all in English for the most part. And so if you don't speak English, you don't have access to the best quality education. That's one accessibility issue. But then now maybe with translators and whatnot, you can kind of shortcut that. But then the price of things, they are priced for North America and Europe. So anybody in Asia, anybody in Africa, anybody in South America or Latin America even, for us, it's almost impossible to access those courses. And we have so much talent here. It's just that people cannot access that education if it is at that price point, right?
Yeah.
And it actually, I just reinforced this idea recently. We were talking about, maybe you would refer some clients to me. And so I was looking into some executive coaching programs, and I wanted to, keep learning and improving my skill set and my toolkit and whatnot. And all the programs were, $4,500 or $4,000 or just as many euros. And for someone who lives in a country with a weaker currency, that's like very inaccessible. So I think all those programs, and when I brought this up to the agency in Europe, they said, well, to be fair, most of our customers come from North America and Europe. So
Yeah. It makes sense, but I agree with you that that's a huge barrier. It's interesting. You're looking at this problem from one angle, that's like the accessibility, and I look at it from a different angle a little bit. I've been having a lot of feelings recently about how much the world is designed to make us feel like it's never enough. Like our education is never enough. Our experience is never enough. We always have to go seek that, additional certification, that additional, like the letters after our names. And this is coming from someone who I love doing all the certifications. Okay. I love learning and I love being out there and like getting all the certifications. But I've actually been exploring this for myself. This was after a conversation with a coach where I was like, telling this coach, I was like, well, do you think I should do like another, like one of these certifications? And she was like, Sara, you've learned enough. Like, go do the work, right? And it was like a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, why do I always feel like I'm never good enough? Like I'm never trained enough. I don't have the right knowledge, or I don't have the right information or whatever. It's always like, like I need to do more. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of, just the way that our world is structured, especially for people. I think for coaches, it's especially, do you know how many people have coaching programs that are supposed to make you a better coach? And then how many people message me on LinkedIn because they have the new way or the best way to get me more clients? And it, right? Like, it's always just like, oh, like you're not doing this well enough. I had someone send me an email saying, hey, Sara, I was looking at your website and here's all the things that I think are wrong with your website. And if you hire me to fix your website, this is how much I'll charge. And I was like, first of all, that's a terrible sales tactic to start with.
That's rude.
It's just rude, right? Also, like, a lot of this is happening. It's like, let me point out the thing that's wrong with you. And then here, give me all this money to fix it. But then the pricing structure, to your point, is set up for people that are making a lot of money, that are, making US dollars, like, are in Europe or in North America. So it's like this kind of, the problem is bigger, I think, than just accessibility. I think there's another part to it, is like we're constantly creating this world where people feel not adequate enough, not good enough, not, trained enough, whatever.
And I will add something onto that because it ties beautifully to what we had been talking about earlier. I just came back from a training in the US where it was a very diverse group of people, facilitators that were getting trained for a certain program. And one of them, beautiful woman from Brazil, said she's a sales enablement manager. So she has to train salespeople. And she said, well, I always have to overcome that initial, I'm a woman, I'm Latina. So I have to come in with all this like additional knowledge to kind of compensate for the fact that I'm a woman and I'm Latina. And then another person, like very renowned book author, speaker, like all the credentials, but she's a woman of color and she's queer and her presence is very like, it's disruptive just by standing in a room. And she's like, well, I always have to lead with, I'm a chemical engineer so that I can get buy-in from corporates. And I was so angry when I heard this because I was like, why do we have to compensate for being who we are? Why do I have to overcompensate for being a woman or for being Latina or for being Black or for being queer? Who cares? Yeah. So I think there's a whole narrative that we keep feeding into by adding, those extra letters behind our name and by introducing ourselves in these ways that are like, okay, well, but I have all these credentials, so I'm trustworthy. Yeah, it's also like really hard to get out of that loop, right? To get out of the matrix when you are trying to get work. And so in a way, you feel like you have to conform to those rules so that you can get work. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. It's hard. It's a challenge.
It is a challenge. I think our conversation very beautifully came kind of full circle. We started talking about, this way of showing up in the world that we're conditioned to feel like we have to have one career, one job. And we talked about so many cool things and then came back to the world needs us to, engage in these narratives and like be a part of this, like constantly, like feeding into this narrative of you're not good enough, you don't have enough credentials, you don't have enough talent or enough education. And then we buy into that. And it's hard to disengage from that. I think I've personally, I don't know about you, Nani, but I've personally found a lot more success showing up authentically. Like I don't have any, I have clients that love working with me. They don't reach out to me and they're like, oh, I saw that you're certified, blah, blah, blah. They reach out to me and they're like, hey, can we have a conversation about whether you can help support me? And then we have the conversation and they're like, yeah, you're absolutely the person I want to work with. I mean, I have a client that, you know, she was my first client that signed like a full year contract with me for intuitive development coaching. And I tell people this all the time. I'm like, I did not go out there trying to be an intuitive development coach. I'm a career coach. But she showed up. I found her in this weird way, like the guy that basically the butcher that like packages up the meat for me at the grocery store was like, oh yeah, I have a relative that wants a coach, and you mentioned you're a coach, and I was like, yes. And then she showed up and we met, and she was like, I really like your energy. I really like the way that you work. Here's what I need. And I was like, I don't do that. It's like, I don't do intuitive development coaching, but I do energy work. And she was like, oh, but like, this makes sense for you. And she had to convince me that I could help her.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to your point of like, you know, how do we like branding yourself as someone where I'm like, well, I do career coaching. And it's almost like you shut these doors for yourself sometimes, where you're shut off to this idea of doing something different or calling it something different. Because you're so tied to this idea of like, here's the thing that I do. Here's this nice little box that I'm going to put it in, you know, and go out there and sell it.
Yeah. Labels are hard for me. So what I would say is like, maybe try to find a couple of boxes that might be comfortable for you so that people can understand what they can come to you for, but then also be open, you know, don't draw those edges so dark so that you can actually explore a little bit over like, okay, I don't do that, but let's try, you know, I may. And then you ended up being an intuitive development coach. Why not?
Right.
I mean,
why not?
Who knew that it was a thing?
Yeah.
And that's how we continue to innovate and bring in new perspectives to work and new fields of work even. By integrating different worlds. And I think that's the value that we have as human beings with unique experiences, with unique life experiences. Because you can, as I said in the beginning, you can look at a problem from so many different angles and bring a unique perspective. And that's the value that we bring.
Yeah. Oh, such a good conversation. Nani, last question for you. What is... This was filled with so much good advice, like career advice, especially for people who are multi-potentialites. What is a piece of advice maybe that you haven't shared, career advice or something that you can leave our audience with?
Oh. For career advice, what I would say is, and going back to this mindset of we're always looking at what credential can we get next, stop and look at what you've got, right? And that doesn't only mean what credentials you've got. You're not less valuable if you don't have a college degree. Stop telling yourself that, you know? So look at all the skills that you have, and some of those skills do not come only from your work experience, right? If you immigrated to a different country, you have a level of adaptation, resilience, you know, change management that other people who were always in the same environment do not have. So those are very important skills to have for the job market. So I think it's important to take another good look at yourself and your lived experience and see what skill set you already have and where you can pull in some of those strengths to help someone else, and decide where you want to have that impact and who you want to help and how you want to show up. And I think that's something very valuable that we all can do. And then my other big piece of advice would be network. And when I say network, I'm talking about actually connecting with other human beings over a shared interest, not like, do you have an opening for me? That's not networking, right? But it's like, there are so many cool people in the world, so many interesting people doing interesting work. It's fascinating. So find a rabbit hole that you're interested in and go down under, like research, get curious, talk to someone, then they'll tell you about someone else, and then they work in what field now? And then you start researching about that, and that just broadens your perspective of what's possible for you too. And I think that's the best thing we can do for ourselves is like expand our possibilities.
Oh, I love that. Oh, okay. Well, Nani, if people want to work with you, set up time with you, talk to you, get your knowledge, your experience, your advice to guide their own lives, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Through Sara on one of her connections.
Okay. I will drop your LinkedIn in the show notes for this. This was such a great conversation. Oh, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for the space. I love talking. I'm a Gemini, so that explains my duality too, in a way. And this was really interesting. And it's always so fun to go deep into these topics, right, with someone and pick their brains and just share a little bit more of our experience in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience in the world with us. And I'll chat with you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.